Signature TV. News in your pocket.
Hello, thanks for joining us on this special interview series. I'm Vin Martin Obiora Ilo. Today, among so many other things, we'll be interrogating Christianity amidst of African religion. And our guest is a senior research professor at the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology at the DePaul University in Chicago, United States of America. Professor Stan Chu Ilo. Prof, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Vin, for having me.
I know that not too long ago, you were part of a conference that was entitled Journeying Together in Hope. It was put together by this fast-growing network called the Pan-African Catholic Theology and Pastoral Network. What was the objective of pulling, scholars from all over to talk about journeying together in hope?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vin. That's a very important question. The late Pope Francis, before he died, declared this year the year of hope. That is 2025. It's a jubilee year. And he invited everyone, not only Catholics, not only Christians, but the entire world, to look into practices of hope. Because when you look around the world today, there are many signs of hopelessness: wars, hunger, starvation, rising poverty, rising nationalism, rising nativism, countries turning in on themselves and turning against the other.
Isolating
Yes,
so to say.
yes, protectionism, like what you see in the United States and many other countries. Here in our continent, Africa, we see signs of what I call structural exhaustion. So the late Pope, one of the last gifts he gave to the world is, let us look at hope. People need hope to live by. And hope, for us Christians, is not just an ideal, it's not optimism, it's a person, the risen Lord, Jesus Christ, who rises from the dead and says that there is victory over injustice, over despair. So the Congress we organized in Cote d'Ivoire was a Congress organized in partnership with the bishops, Catholic bishops of Africa, and the Confederation of the major superiors of all the major religious institutes and congregations in Africa, and pulled together representatives also from the Holy See and over 36 scholars from outside Africa. So we had more than 250 scholars, practitioners, young people, priests, bishops, religious, to focus on practices of hope. What does hope look like for us as Africans? But what does hope look like for us as people who believe in Jesus Christ, our hope? And that was a very inspirational encounter that witnessed the display, narratives of hope, that I can talk more about in the course of this conversation.
Yeah, when you talk of hope in Africa, for instance, how easy, how practical is it for the ordinary African to really hope with the kind of hunger, insecurity, strife, disease, and all that? And he has been hoping for so many years. Christianity came with hope and faith, and decades after, centuries after, you're still asking him to hope. How about reality, getting the dividends of this century-long hope?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I ask myself the same question. But whenever I talk about hope, I like to refer to the distinction made by the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, the difference between hope and optimism. Now, at the end of apartheid in South Africa, you remember that it looked like the country of South Africa was going to collapse. Inkatha freedom movement, fighting black on black violence. How could people forgive what was done to them by white people? And I remember during the reconciliation sessions that there was a story that really moved me and moved many people. When a white police officer came before the reconciliation tribunal to confess burning a black man. While burning him on one side, he was having barbecue on the other side. Desmond Tutu broke down. Where was our humanity? He wondered. How could a human being burn another human being? You see a human being burning, and then you are burning meat, roasting meat. And journalists asked him, are you hopeful about the future of South Africa? He said, no. Are you optimistic about the future of South Africa? He said, no, I'm not optimistic. I'm hopeful. Optimism is a human approach to the future. If I won a 1 billion lottery, I'll be optimistic. I will pay all my debts. I will buy houses. I will do this. I will do that, like the rich fool in the gospel. But hope is of a different quality. Hope holds on to nothing other than the promise of God. Hope says to the darkness, I beg to differ. Not because I am relying on my strength, but like St. Paul said, I can do all things through the help of him who strengthens me. But hope is not just wishful thinking. Rather, Christian hope is rooted in action, grace. It is, if you like, the constant attempt by believers to say to the darkness, we beg to differ. We can think of what happened during the Civil War in this country, when many of us, many of our ancestors, the Igbo people, and many from Southeast, so many people died, millions. It was one of the first modern genocide. Something that came close to it came later in Rwanda. But our people rose from the ashes. So what gives me hope for Africa, for Nigeria, are one, our people believe in God. Now, some people will say sometimes that, they believe because they are poor, or they believe because, they are superstitious. I don't think so. There is something that faith does. Faith gives people a sense of purpose. It gives them a sense of meaning. It also helps them to make sense of suffering. And like Viktor Frankl talks about human limit, in the face of human limitation, hope breaks and shatters the wall that limits me, because hope gives me the freedom to hold on to God.
So, probably, would it be right to say that hope is more spiritual than physical?
I say rather that hope is the concrete realization, minute by minute, of a promise that is beyond my human capacity, but is still within my human reach because of the presence of God. And hope, and that's the very important thing. People write about hope. I have written about hope. I have a future book on hope that I call Suffering and Smiling. Is what makes our people to hold on to these ambiguities, suffering and smiling, that fella sang about. What makes our people, in spite of the suffering around them, not to despair? The rate of suicide is not higher in Nigeria than in Japan. Japan has one of the highest suicide rates. So I don't think that hope is simply the result of having everything that you need. The second thing that gives me hope is what I call relational resilience, the sense of community, the sense that I am embedded within communities of support, encouragement, the sense that all will be well. Not because we are sure how it will be, but because we hold on to each other. There is a sense of community. I've traveled around the world that I find here. That support system is there. But more fundamentally, I think, is that there are, even in the midst of all these sufferings, pain, there are many stories of reversal that we see around us. People starting businesses in spite of all the challenges that we're facing today. People helping each other in the midst of the genocide in Rwanda. There were so many Christians who refused to kill when others were doing so. That is a demonstration, because we need stories to hold on to. It's the pilot into the future. So I do see those signs of hope in the everyday experiences around this country.
So this takes us to our main topic of today, because you've talked about hope, and you try to say that this hope you talk about is the one that is guaranteed by the belief in God, and there are new questions around Christianity and the promises of Christianity. And today we are interrogating that Christianity and the myths, especially as it concerns the condemnation, age-long condemnation of African religious practices and African religious beliefs. There are a lot of modern, in quotes, people who have suddenly started looking back and trying to interrogate the excellence or the spirituality, or what I could call the good life that their ancestors lived. They were good people. They didn't take bribe. They didn't go after people's wives. They didn't kill. They were kind, and these people were, put in the same bucket and said that these are pagans. So what do you think? I mean, you're a scholar, you're a researcher. What do you think is breeding this new realization, especially in Africa, where people are no longer, ashamed when they pray to say, I pray to my ancestors. I pray, they call their father's name, they call their forefather's name, and then they end it all and say, in the name of Jesus Christ. What are the complications or complexities of this new realization, and what we have been told all over these years, that African religion is paganism?
Yeah, that's a very complex question, but I say here three things. First is we all have need to worship. Worship something, you worship God, or you worship money, you worship power. There is a desire in every human being to hold on to something. The concern is what you worship. And that is why I think the claim of Christianity is about the right kind of worship, because there are all kinds of things people worship. I mean, you can think of even Christian nationalism, you can think of racism, ethnocentrism. There are so many people who are caught up in this thinking and acting that see others as inferior, like white supremacy. A lot of white people think they're better than you because you're a black person. So people can worship their race, worship their tribe. I mean, in Nigeria, people can worship money. It's all about what you worship. And I think that the claim of Christianity is that in Jesus Christ, there is a definitive resolution of that desire to worship by the manifestation of the true face of God, that is love. That is the claim of Christianity. And it doesn't make this claim to the exclusion of others. But it says that by the incarnation, that Jesus has fully revealed to human beings the face of God, who is love. And that by worshiping this God, who is love, and by living like this God manifested to us in Jesus Christ, his practices, his beliefs, his teaching, that we will be able to bring about in the world some signs of hope that Jesus brought to creation. Jesus came to bring us hope that the future is going to be good.
But Africans believed a lot of what they were taught by the colonialists, who also came with the Bible, and a lot of African nationalists are saying now they also came with this exploitative tendency. They give you the Bible. I've heard people say confuse you, and then you're so calm, and then they take whatever they want to take. And you see a lot of, I mean, if you remember, MKO Abiola was one of the advocates that the West needed to pay reparation to Africa for years of exploitation. So a lot of people now who had listened to this message of Christian hope are now suddenly realizing that, I don't want to say they've been duped, that would be too strong to use, a word to use, but they think that they've been shortchanged, you know, and in all that. Forgive me, these questions are long, but I need to really explain that in all this, what they practice is also condemned, because you talked about love. In the African traditional religion, there was love. You talk about community. In the African religion, there was community, and people stayed in a kind of commune, you know, to do what they did. And somebody says it's wrong, and at the end of the day, a lot of people see this exploitation. How, as a scholar, researcher, and someone who has written so much about religion, how do you reconcile, you know, these conflicts?
Yeah, I think there are 2 points. We have to make a distinction again between authentic Christianity manifested in the priorities and practices of Jesus Christ, and how this faith has grown over time. So there is a difference between what is essential to the Christian message, that is the gospel, and how people have lived it. All of us, in our attempt to live Christianity, we bring in our cultures, we bring in, like St. Augustine says, everything human is imperfect. So the people who brought Christianity to us, missionaries, also came with their own culture. So one of the challenges Christianity continues to wrestle with, not only in the past, but also today, is the confusion between what I call authentic Christianity, that is what Jesus preached, what he did, what we have in the Gospels and in our traditions, in the lives of the saints, and how many other cultural, political, economic systems have come to be confused with Christianity. And that big word is what we call Christendom. So Christianity is different from Christendom. Christianity Authentic Christianity reflects what I have said, what Jesus said, did. Jesus didn't say enslave any person. Jesus didn't say destroy any person's culture. What Jesus was concerned is the destruction, if you like, the conversion of sinners. Every culture is an embodiment of some seeds of this love, of this light. But because cultures are contingent, that means they come in time, they are also, sadly, imperfect. They carry human elements that are sinful. So economic systems are cultural systems. So in the missionary time, there are some missionaries who also carried with it the Western superiority complex, white supremacy, that carried with it racism, the enslavement of Africans. Jesus never enslaved any person, nor did he ask any person to enslave people. Capitalism is another big elephant in the room. Neoliberal capitalism. It came with the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the attempt by the West to conquer the rest. After the Berlin Conference, yes, and then the scramble and partition, and with it came the pulverization of Africa. So we say you have the God, the gold, and the glory. They confuse these two. God, Christianity. I mean, who doesn't love to hear and embrace the good news that God is love? That's Christianity, at the heart of Christianity. But the gold had to do with commerce, with capitalism, and then the glory, empire building. So sometimes the missionaries, some Christians, Western Christians, confuse these things. The truth is that over time, especially at the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church clearly rejected that form of the gold and the glory and emphasized God. That is why when the Second Vatican Council converged in 1962, the first document issued was on the worship of God. Sacrosanctum Concilium, the worship of the true God. That's the center. And so we must condemn all forms of all attempt, not only in the past, but also today, to use Christianity to advance any kind of cultural agenda. And that is the problem when it comes to the cultural renaissance that you mentioned about people wanting to go back to ancestral religion. I think that Africa is facing a crisis of history. The lie told Africans by modernity that there is a convergence both in politics and religion is unfolding and accelerating at a very destructive pace. So you see a crisis of state. You also see a crisis of religion. So look at the African Sahel, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. Cote d'Ivoire is going through its own crisis right now because President Ouattara, who's been there since 2010, when Cote d'Ivoire came close to war, then the former President Gbagbo was removed with the help of French forces. Now Ouattara wants to run for a fourth term. Look at Cameroon. So you see, this crisis of the state is also happening at the same time that you have crisis of religion, not only Christianity, but also Islam. Look at what we have in northern Nigeria and the rest of our country with the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, this aggressive, theocratic or theocentric imperialism adopted by this asymmetrical warfare, adopted by radical Islamists, is sweeping across the continent of Africa. So this is the crisis we face. And then Christianity is going through its own crisis because Christianity came with a total package. Now it is unraveling. So you have the rise of Pentecostalism, prosperity gospel, African traditional Christian religious practices. So that's what you see is a crisis of history. So this crisis, people are looking for solution, because as this heated to if you like, homogenic structures and systems are now kind of fragmenting, people are trying to find something that can help them to sustain life.
Is it like an identity crisis?
It is both a question of whether people really, like Christianity and I think Islam and the politics in Africa give us some kind of hybrid identity. So a lot of us, colonialism, we're still caught in this coloniality of the imagination. Many of us today still, even black people, look at even Nigerians, when in Igbo you act in a very good way, I say in a meko onyocha. You see it. Our people, the idea onyocha is better. For many people, those of us who live in the United States are living a good life. And so there is a crisis of history. Whether we had an identity after colonialism is a question that what kind of identity do we actually have today?
I need to come in here because you've identified a crisis. You've identified a conflict. Is the church, let me use the Catholic Church, which is one of the biggest denominations in Africa. Is the church in realization of this big challenge? And if they are, what are they doing, to resolve it, or to remediate it? Because you've heard people say things like, all the people that have been involved in a lot of embezzlement, in a lot of corruption, or they are either Christians or Muslims. So believers in these religions that came to condemn the African religion. So what is the church doing to resolve this conflict?
Yeah, first I like to correct this impression that Christianity came to condemn African religion. Some forms of Christianity did. Indeed, there is a theory developed by the late Lamine Sane of Gambia, the theory of translation, that said that one of the greatest achievements of Christianity was actually translating the Bible to vernacular. And in doing that, like Igbo language was first standardized by missionaries. And the first, in Nigeria at least, the first newspaper published in Yoruba was also at the instance of Christianity. People like Bishop Ajayi Crowther helped to translate the Bible into Yoruba. Now, by 1958, the Bible had been translated into more than 300 African languages. What happened that once our people heard the word of God in their native language, it triggered a cultural momentum that their language could now speak of God. You see what I mean? So if we can talk about God as Chukwu, and we find that the God that was talked about is actually the God that our people always talked about. So like Robin Hutton said, what Christianity did was to make what was micro, macro. So whereas our people always worship Chukwu as Igbos, what happened when the Igbos embraced Christianity and the Bible was translated into Igbo? They now see that Chukwu is also the Chukwu of everyone. So it moved the understanding of Chukwu from a microcosmic Igbo world to a macrocosmic, so that the Chukwu can be identified with Jesus, just as it can be identified with the Oluwa of the Yorubas. So it moved, and that's the what they call translation. It helped to trigger a cultural invention among Africans. So that's one. The second point is what the church is doing. The Second Vatican Council, as I said earlier, was the bold statement by the Catholic Church that the church wants to update itself in order to understand historical and cultural evolution.
But that was more than 62 years ago.
Yes, and the synod on synod, the synod on synodality that is still ongoing in the Catholic Church. Pope Francis invited the Catholic Church to what he called missionary conversion. Missionary conversion, so that all the institutions, systems, structures, all the practices and priorities of the Catholic Church, according to this movement, must have a missionary orientation. And what that missionary orientation? Starting afresh from Jesus Christ.
Starting afresh from Jesus Christ. We'll take a break. When we return, we'll delve more into this interrogation of Christianity and the myths of African religious worship. Don't go away.
Every second, every minute, every day, news is breaking, events occur, and there are new developments. At Signature TV, we follow these stories objectively, bringing all sides without bias, explaining the complex issues, breaking down the numbers, and investigating the issues behind the news. Anywhere and everywhere, near or far, wherever the news is, we will be there. Signature TV. News in your pocket.
If you're just joining us, you're watching our special interview series. And today we're interrogating Christianity and the myths of African religious practice, or call it religious worship. And our guest has been a senior research professor at the Center for World Catholicism and intercultural theology at the DePaul University in Chicago, United States of America, Professor Stan Chu Ilo. Yeah, Father Stan, we were talking about, the conflicts and what the church is doing, to remediate this conflict among believers, not just in Africa, but all over the world. I mean, when you look today that in churches in the United States where you live, the churches have become empty, and the Africans who they took religion to are the ones taking religion back to the people in the West. So are we seeing Christianity waning? And we've talked about the contradictory aspects of this religion, including what we have seen in Islam, where people take the message and distort it to their own convenience. So are we seeing a deterioration in Christianity?
If you look at the statistics, actually Christianity is growing.
Oh, really?
It's growing, especially in Africa. And there has been a latest statistics that show that Catholicism in the United States and in Europe received a huge bounce with the election of Pope Leo. Now, maybe this is a honeymoon, one might say, for him, but we do this research at the center, we're like stargazers looking at the shifts in Christianity, the currents. What we see is not a decline, but a redistribution of Christian population, if I use it.
How do you mean?
Yeah, so remember that, like you rightly pointed out, Western missionaries came to us. They came to Africa, the non-Western society. Just like the Psalm said, they go out, full of tears. Western missionaries, they left their homelands with tears, their parents, their family crying as they came as missionaries to China, to Philippines, to India, here in the continent of Africa. Now, the fruits of their effort are so evident, what we call the reverse mission. So like the propaganda feed, the secretary there, Archbishop Fortunato, says, we are now witnessing the church of the sheaves. Says they go out full of seeds, crying, sowing, but then they come back bringing in the sheaves. So the effort of Western missionaries have borne immense fruit. So we are having a redistribution of Christian population, not a decline. So Christianity is growing, but it's growing in some parts of the world, and those parts of the world are now redistributing. Just like Western missionaries came to our place, now we have missionaries going out there. But that's not to minimize the disaffiliation that we see, especially among young people in Western society. But also in Africa, there is a growing concern about the Pentecostalization of Christianity. Now, I am not saying that Pentecostalism is not good, because Pentecost was the birthday of the church. So we are all, if you like, really Pentecostals, because we are all driven is the Holy Spirit. Jesus says the Spirit will come and will lead you into all truth. And we are living the Pentecost. But again, as when we started this interview, I talked about right worship, right Christianity, worshiping the right God. I think that there are some concerns that there are forms of Christian growth, even in Nigeria, that is not, if I quote the theory that I have developed, what I call the vital church. It is not every growing church that is a healthy church, and it's not every healthy church that is a growing church. So there are some kinds of growth that have not made Christianity or Christian witnessing positive and healthy, both for Christianity and for society. Because like Cantala Mesa, the former preacher of the household, People household, said, if at the time the Christian population was growing in Europe, if they were producing healthy Christians, hopeful Christians, well-adjusted Christians, clerics, then we will not be dealing with the kinds of crisis of clerical sexual abuse that Europe and North America are dealing with today, that have sadly affected the loyalty of people. So many people, when the church was growing in Europe, there were many bad things happening. So we here in the continent of Africa must learn the lesson that it's not simply about counting numbers. We also must face up to the reality. By their fruits you will know them. Let them see your light, see your good works. They will come to believe in your Father in heaven. That's what the Church of the Sheaves today, the fruits of the missionary work. We are the fruits of the missionary work. And that fruit must give vitality to our culture, to our politics, to everything we do. If we are worshiping the true God as Christians in Nigeria, we must then treat each other the way God treats each and every one of us. But when we look around, we see the crisis, and that's crisis that is, I think, is pushing so many people to all kinds of strange religious practices.
Let's still stay here, and I'm going to ask, is prosperity Christianity helping Christianity?
Remember, I've said, and many people have, Paul Gifford, who is a leading scholar in this area, he's attacked my work on this point. Because Paul Gifford, I mean, he wrote a book, Church, Democracy and Development in Africa, where he takes 4 pages arguing about, he says that I represent the African, the quintessential African theological position that he feels is not good for Africa. I don't agree with him.
He called you out.
Yes, because in his book, and then I'm responding to him with my next book, because this is how scholars work. And we are best of friends. He's perhaps the most prominent Western scholar that has studied African Pentecostalism. But he then will, subscribe to what you are saying here. He says that Christianity in Africa is enchanted religion, enchantment. So he uses Max Weber, Weber's argument that, as secularization accelerates, people will become less religious. So as people become more scientific, they will then get rid of their so-called superstitious or enchanted imagination. This idea of witches and wizards, sorceries and charms and miracles, that is a reflection of an enchantment, a non-scientific phase in human evolution. So that's Paul Gifford's argument. And so for him, the Pentecostals are really the reflection of this religious enchantment. I argue that what you see in Africa today is not enchantment. African traditional religion, Africans did not become religious because they became Christians. Africans became Christians because they are religious people. Because Christianity did not bring God to us. Like the missionary, I forgot his name, he said, I went to Africa and I found God. I thought I'm taking God to Africans. Africans taught me God. What is at stake is capitalism. Because this is the problem. People like Gifford and many others like of his ilk in the theological and religious studies discipline hold on strongly to this, that Pentecostalism or the growth in Christianity in Africa is because people are poor, they are enchanted. No, my argument is that, number one, there is at the heart of African culture a desire to worship the true God. And this true God is found in positive, life-affirming relationship that is driven by life-affirming ethics of what I call regenerative ethics. That is, whether it is about human and cosmic flourishing, the practices that we have to embrace when you are related with people in a positive relationship, life bond that holds us together. Now, capitalism is the problem, and many Westerners don't want to mention this. Capitalism destroyed and continues to destroy Christianity, because it is that form of Christianity that you find in any phase of history that focuses on money, on wealth. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor." So it is, what is problematic is this idea of winner takes all, that some people will be millionaires and billionaires while others are poor and suffering, that some countries would manipulate, exploit, and destroy other countries' economy, and then they prosper, that countries in Africa will become dumping grounds for all kinds of toxic products and second-hand goods. It is that kind of global economy that Pope Francis says is economy that kills, that is the problem. Then when the poor are being squeezed, Christianity that is giving our people hope is being poo-pooed by some of these folks as, enchantment. However, there are some of our pastors who sadly are very materialistic. We must, as preachers of the good news, also speak truth to ourselves. That some of us have commercialized the gospel, that some of us have sold out to politicians, that some of us have not embodied the ways and means of the poor man of Galilee. But, as we say, that abuse of anything does not destroy the utility of that thing. That's why St. Augustine makes that distinction between frui and uti. He says in his discussion on Christian doctrine that we must focus on the fruits that something brings, the positive fruits, rather than just focus on utility. You know, this idea of use and dump, abuse, misuse, that I think is what is happening to Christianity. And it's not only Christianity. We desire to worship. And Christianity, like any other religion, suffers from those who would twist the worship of true God to the worship of money, like in prosperity gospel, and who would twist the worship of true God to the worship and the idolatry of even of human beings. There are some of us who are preachers, who are religious leaders, who've made themselves idols. And this is the problem.
And they're worshipped.
And they are worshipped and not Jesus Christ. So they become the obstacle to the work of God. And that is what Jesus said to Peter. Get behind me, Satan, because you are an obstacle to the work of God. So we must not confuse these two. And that's why in all the initial preaching of Jesus is a call for conversion. I think that what Christianity needs today is what it has always needed: conversion. People, a change of heart, so that our hearts can be like the heart of Jesus. And then when we have the heart of Jesus, we are in tune with that true worship that will lead to a better society.
Prof, let's end from where we started, where we talked about African religion, young Africans going back to their roots once again, trying to connect with their forefathers and all that. Is there a way, is there a dynamism in the church's approach to, like a walk back, like when they have looked at everything? Is there a way, is there a walk back to, you know, to pay some attention to those beliefs, those culture, those history that define the African? Like you said, one of these people came and said, I thought I was taking God to Africa, but Africans taught me God. Is there a way to walk back and look at those areas that made it easy for Africans to be religious, to be Christians, and see how, you know, an intersection where these things can go hand in hand without making them think that most of what they were doing was idolatry, and see a way of a meeting point between religion and the traditional African religion.
Yeah, I think that one of the most remarkable words ever spoken by a pope to Africans were the words spoken by Pope Paul VI in 1969 when he visited Uganda at the Martha's Shrine in Namugongo, where he said, you Africans must have an African Christianity. That was one of the most remarkable words said. You must have an African Christianity.
Did he expand on that?
Yes, and that's what today we call enculturation. God cannot save you outside of your culture. That's what he says. God will save me as an Igbo man, not as any other.
Further break it?
Yes, the Second Vatican Council said that by becoming one with us, Jesus, the Son of God, has, in his own way, embraced every human culture and did what? And redeemed it from within. Every human culture has the seed of God. That's what, the big word logos spermaticos, the logos, the word, the seed of God's word is implanted in every culture. That's what Pope Paul VI and then Pope John Paul II came to Africa and said to them again, you must now become missionaries to yourselves and to the rest of the world. So if the Westerners made mistake in missionizing you, now you can do the course correction. We cannot fold our hands and start talking, oh, the Westerners, they did this, they did. They have done their own. And actually, I say sometimes, very sarcastically, if they imposed Western culture on us as missionaries, that's a sign that Western culture permeated their Christianity, so they didn't know how to do otherwise. I mean, they had to offer us what they had, which was their own Western culture.
So what the Pope is saying is that people like you who have the opportunity of preaching to them, like being their spiritual fathers and spiritual advisors, that this is the time to correct the misinformation.
And we are doing that. You ask, what are we doing? For the first time in the history of the Catholic Church in Africa, I had the greatest privilege of my life to have been part of the small group of theologians that worked with all the Catholic bishops of Africa to produce this Vision 2050 document.
What does it say?
Voted in Kigali by all the bishops of Africa as the roadmap for the future. It has 12 pillars. I will not be able to talk about that. It's going to take me,
Can you summarize it?
Yeah, so it says that we must evangelize Africa by Africans with respect, due respect to African culture, but African agency. Secondly, we must protect, preserve our environment. Third, the church in Africa and African people all over the world must become self-reliant. We can't be a dependent church. If we are begging for help from Westerners or from China, we will not have respect. Number 4, Catholic education and Christian formation must be the key. Another one is we are now in AI, digital technology, that the church today must embrace the digital world and use all available means, because I think the next battle that we are already fighting, I wouldn't say the battle we are fighting right now in the world is the battle of the mind. Many of our young people, even the older ones, people are now slaves to machines, and AI can mimic, invent, create. So the church in Africa wants to engage young people. It wants to engage African culture. It wants to engage, especially the other point that it also said, the health of our people. You talk about all these neo-pagan movements, and I don't call them neo-pagan movements, but people going back to the ancestors. One of the problems that the bishops embraced, and it will now, they're launching it this September, the health of our people. Many of our people are dying from preventable and treatable diseases. So how can the church be a church for burying the dead? The coffin and the church symbols are very important. In Uganda, at the height of HIV/AIDS crisis, many people who were making coffins, you know what they did? They came the streets to the churches, they lined up. That's where you go to Kampala. If you're going to many churches in those days, they are lined up with coffins, because many who are dying of HIV/AIDS, they are so weakened by the disease, their family so poor. So you present the product where it is used. They carry the person from the hospital, come to the street leading to the church, put the person in the coffin, and bring to the church. So one African theologian said, the church must deal with the church, the coffin, and the church paradox. So we must address the health of our people and the health of our relationship, the health of our politics, the health of our religion. I think that this is the most courageous and prophetic steps taken by the African bishops to meet these challenges, not just simply by preaching, but drawing a roadmap and a strategy. It is our task as theologians and church leaders to translate this vision into daily practice. And my hope is that in the next 1 year or two, if we sit down to talk about this, we can point out some of the signs and narratives of hope. Because the goal of the church in Africa today, the Catholic Church that is to bring hope to our people. And that hope is not simply words, but true churches, faith communities that model a certain prophetic and counter witnessing that people can look at and say, I will follow that path.
Are you talking about a more practical church? A church that is not only preaching from the pulpit, but a church that is getting involved in the lives of the people?
Yes, I think
is that the church you're talking about?
I think the church has always been part of the lives of the people. I mean, who are the saints that, I always say, don't read our theology, because sometimes you read what I write, you will say, you might get headache, right? But look at the lives of saints. They are the greatest preachers of the gospel. The most authentic evidence of Christianity, and indeed any religion, are the saints. And we see all of them all over. It's not just those that are canonized. And that's why, when we talk about ancestral religion in Africa, Christianity is an ancestral religion. Who are our ancestors? Those who embodied and lived fully the gospel message. They become footprints of God in our history. Footprints that we can look at and follow God. I think that is what you mean by practice, the life of the saints. We call it, in spiritual term, witnesses.
I know somewhere in the, I think it was in the Acts of the Apostle, where Jesus talked about being the light. And what then is the essence of light if it goes under the bushel?
Yes, that's the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus was preaching. You are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth. Yeah, that's what we need. Pope Paul VI, in the most important document on evangelization, he wrote, the modern men and women today no longer listen to teachers, but to witnesses. If they will listen to any teacher, it is because that teacher was first a witness. I think that if we go back to what we did in Côte d'Ivoire, great inspirational moment, we were looking at these witnesses, young people in Burkina Faso, who in the midst of the rise of radical Islamism, these young people, 7 of them, are working to create what they call peacekeepers. De-radicalization campaign by young people. These are high school, university students all over Côte d'Ivoire. Young people in South Sudan at a place called Yambio, Tamburo, who are going from house to house, cultivating, doing agriculture with poor women, with their Bishop Hiboro Kusala. Young people in northern Uganda at a place called Gulu, who are creating peace movement. You know, like Gulu was the place, as a city, was totally obliterated from the face of the earth by the Lord's Resistance Army. 20 years ago, you could not walk freely in Gulu. I was in Gulu 2 years ago, and I was amazed at what these young people are doing at St. Monica's College. Girls who were trafficked, some of them forced into early marriage to the rebels of the Lord's Resistance Army in a place called St. Monica. They are sowing hope. That's what they call the place. These young girls give me hope. Those are the kinds of witnesses to the Christian faith
that we need today.
Yes.
Professor Stan Trilo, I'd like to thank you. I wish we had all the time, to talk about some of these challenges that the church, Christianity, and religion is facing all over the world. But it's a good place to end this, where you have said that do what I do, not just what I say. I think that's the summary of the last part of this conversation, that we must be witnesses, not just because we speak, but because we live it in our lives. I'd like to thank you for coming on this special interview session. I've been speaking with Professor Stan Trilo, who is a senior research professor at the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology at the Paul University in Chicago, the United States of America. I'm Vin Martin Obiora Ilo in Enugu, Nigeria. Thanking you for joining us and asking you that we do this again.
Signature TV. News in your pocket.